Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's been almost a couple years now since I've been up to Canada.
Keen to cross. Fully vaccinated Americans line up to visit Canada. But when can Canadians head south? Also,
our climate plan does not meet our targets.
Code red for humanity. The UN issues a severe warning on the impacts of climate change, what it means for BC, and
not very much that we can do.
I know there's people trying to get it under control, so we'll just get out of the way.
Out of home.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spot fires.
Wildfires force people to flee in the BC interior.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Anita is away tonight. We begin at the Canada-U.S. border where fully vaccinated Americans and permanent residents waited to enter British Columbia for the first time since March 2020. Hundreds lined up to cross this morning. Zara Premji now on why some experts say this could be a risky but necessary move.
We haven't seen this since last March. A lineup of Americans coming into Canada, an unfamiliar thought more than a year after our border closed to our southern neighbors.
We had no idea we would not be able to get into Canada, when we bought our house. So we're really excited to finally get up there.
Cars packed to the brim with family, pets, and luggage ready to reconnect after a long wait.
I'm going into Tsawwassen to see my family. It's been almost a couple years now since I've been up to Canada.
We're also taking this time to go visit our relatives who we haven't seen in a while.
But not all U.S. citizens and permanent residents can enter Canada. There are some rules.
They must be fully vaccinated. You have to be asymptomatic. You're not displaying any signs or symptoms for COVID-19. As well, you must be in possession of a negative pre-arrival molecular test that the specimen has been taken within 72 hours of your entry. They have to have all this information, including the proof of vaccination, their contact information, and a suitable quarantine plan already uploaded into our official app, ArriveCan, prior to entering Canada.
And if you meet those, then the border is open to you. But experts warn the plan is not foolproof.
If they were infected right before they got tested, they might not have tested positive yet. They might test positive if we test them on arrival, but we're not testing everyone on arrival. So that means there will still probably be some breakthrough infections that will be able to get through that kind of porous border.
But this limited reopening has visitors relieved.
I haven't seen my mom in person and my brother and sister-in-law, my niece and nephew, so I'm super excited.
And while Canada opens to the U.S., the invite is yet to be reciprocated. Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meanwhile, BC recorded more than 1,000 new confirmed COVID cases over the weekend. The province hit its highest 7-day rolling average since the end of May. More than half of those cases are in the interior health region, which has been the hotspot recently. But we also hit another vaccination milestone today. The number of fully vaccinated British Columbians, 12 and older, has now passed 70%. The province is also shortening the interval between first and second doses. Instead of 7 weeks, people here now only have to wait 28 days before booking their next appointment. Still, Dr. Bonnie Henry says that waiting longer, for between 6 to 8 weeks, could still offer better protection. Today marks 1 year since logging blockades were set up at the Fairy Creek watershed on Vancouver Island. Demonstrators are marking that anniversary with a march in BC's capital today and claim police were taking more people away as well. Isabel Regem joins us now with more. Isabel.
Dan, police have made more than 500 arrests at the site of the blockades near Port Renfrew. The majority of those arrests were for breaching a court injunction. This afternoon, a group delivered a petition to the legislature. More than 150,000 people signed the petition calling on the BC government to protect old-growth forests. Organizers of the march, among them Indigenous leaders and researchers, argue protecting these forests is the most effective way to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Fortunately, the most at-risk old-growth forests in BC are still open to logging, still unprotected, and this is a direct contradiction to the promise that this government made to be elected last fall. And so we're delivering the message from these hundreds of thousands of people to say it has to stop now.
Efforts to block Teal Jones logging crews continued this summer despite an injunction issued by the BC Supreme Court in April. It allows Teal Jones to resume logging and gives police authority to remove blockades. But those opposed are staying put. Teal Jones says it plans to harvest 20 hectares of 200 hectares available for harvest. Now, earlier this summer, the BC government approved the request of 3 Vancouver Island First Nations, deferring logging for 2 years of about 2,000 hectares in the Fairy Creek area. Those still standing at the blockade say these deferrals fall short of protecting what's left.
And Isabel, has there been any more enforcement taken at those blockades today?
That's something that we've been asking all day. Spokesperson for the RCMP says yes, there would be action taken today, but did not elaborate and did not say if more arrests were made today. Rainforest Flying Squad, a group of activists on site, says people have been arrested today and that RCMP have been raiding their camps. Dan?
Isabel Regem joining us live tonight. Thank you, Isabel.
Thanks.
Well, rain over the weekend eased the fire situation in our province somewhat. Several evacuation orders and alerts were rescinded, but 10 more fires have ignited in the past 2 days. There are now 263 active fires in BC, leading to the evacuation of more than 6,500 properties, with another 32,000 on alert. There are more than 3,500 firefighters and personnel working to douse those flames, along with 200 plus helicopters and planes to support ground crews. The fire danger remains moderate to high in much of BC. In the interior, more than 2,000 homes remain under an evacuation order because of the White Rock Lake fire. It's burning between Vernon and Kamloops, and many evacuees have ended up in Vernon. That's where our Brady Strachan is.
I'm at the Evacuee Reception Center here in Vernon. Officials say more than 1,000 people have come through these doors behind me to register with emergency services, find accommodations, or get a bite to eat.
All good for now? Sure, please. I'll take one.
Many evacuees are into their 3rd day out of their homes. They have no idea when they will be allowed to return. Some of them don't know if they have a home to return to.
It's a little scary, thinking that I'm going to be losing everything. Not knowing what's going on, trying to find out as much information as we can, but nobody has a lot of information to give out, and there's a lot of false information.
The fire has grown to more than 550 square kilometers in size. Multiple homes have been destroyed, including several in the community of Monty Lake. Today, emergency officials lifted an evacuation order for the community of Fintry and homes further south. But several communities along the northwest side of Okanagan Lake are still threatened by the fire.
We were away when this all happened, and we came back and we could not get into our house to get anything out, unfortunately. So that makes it even more stressful.
The fire has also cut short many vacations for out-of-town tourists. This family from Fort St. John was just setting up their camping trailer last Friday when the order came to leave.
We've kind of just been moseying around hoping that it would open up for us, but it's not looking good, so we're going to start heading home.
Fire officials say rain and cooler temperatures over the weekend helped to slow the growth of the fire. But another heat wave is expected to hit the region with temperatures into the mid to high 30s later this week. Brady Strachan, CBC News in Vernon.
After a summer of devastating floods, heat waves, droughts, and as we've seen, wildfires across this country, the United Nations has now issued its most drastic warning on climate change. Humans, it says, are unequivocally to blame for global warming, and we will pay an ever-increasing price. Still, as Jayla Bernstein shows us, there is a chance to prevent a worst-case scenario.
It's a bit like an alarm clock. You can keep switching the alarm clock off, but eventually, if you don't get out of bed and go to wherever you're meant to be going to, it will be too late.
His hope now that world leaders won't hit snooze. The report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns the Earth will hit its tipping point earlier than expected, warming 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels within just 20 years. That's the temperature cap nations set when they signed the Paris Agreement 6 years ago.
This is probably the last report that will be written before we go through and beyond 1.5 degree C, unless we act now. And that's quite a stark warning.
Look at this.
Leaning on thousands of scientific papers, the report outlines the consequences if warming continues. By 2050, the Arctic could be ice-free during the summer. There will be more heat waves and droughts. Sea levels will continue to rise, meaning coastal floods seen every 100 years could happen every year. And to erase all doubt, it unflinchingly states humans are to blame. To back that up, a simulated comparison between the world's average surface temperature with human factors and without. The UN Secretary General called the report a code red for humanity, saying the alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. In every scenario the report presented, warming gets worse, but there's still time to limit the damage.
If collectively we're able to reduce emissions quickly enough and get to net zero by the middle of this century, we can limit warming to 1.5 degrees or somewhere not too far above that.
Activists point out that will take real political will, and it'll be tested soon. In a few months, Glasgow will host a major UN climate conference, and world leaders will be under pressure to come up with a plan. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Toronto.
Closer to home, environmentalists say it's time to reconsider how BC subsidizes coal and fossil fuels. As the CBC's Johanna Wagstaffe explains, many groups hope today's report from the UN will spark renewed interest in going green.
From an unprecedented heat dome to a devastating wildfire season, the consequences of climate change in BC have politicians and environmentalists urging for immediate action.
Our climate plan does not meet our targets. This government continues to subsidize the oil and gas industry. It ultimately continues to allow for forestry practices that undermine our capacity to respond to climate change. We need to see concerted, urgent action and a plan backed up by funding to respond to climate change right now.
Environmentalists are echoing a core message of the IPCC report, an end to coal and fossil fuels. According to Clean BC, about 2/3 of our energy is based on fossil fuels in BC, and about 1/3 is based on electricity.
We're running out of time, and each ton of fossil fuels that we burn, each ton of CO2 that we add to the atmosphere is a ton we can't afford anymore.
BC's NDP-led government spent $1.3 billion on fossil fuel subsidies, which is 8.3% more than the previous year, according to international environmental group Stand Earth.
Well, most British Columbians don't understand the extent to which British Columbia subsidizes fossil fuels. So it's as if we're paying someone to go around and throw gasoline on the ground in front of the wildfire fighters.
The IPCC report affirms humans are unequivocally to blame for climate change. The question remains why investment and expansion in threatening industries continues.
In Canada, the provincial governments own the fossil fuels. Now that's contested by many First Nations, but historically they control Crown land and all the fossil fuels thereunder. So they make easy money from royalties from oil and gas and coal production, creating jobs in the 4-year electoral cycle is a great way to get reelected.
The report says the task seems daunting, but there is hope. Part of it stems from the little actions that lead to big results. Experts say this includes a move away from motor vehicles to electric vehicles, or retrofitting buildings with heat pumps instead of gas furnaces, and to urge politicians to put forward more impactful policies. Johanna Wagstaffe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with our forecast. Joe, lots to take away from the UN climate report. I know you've been looking at it. Let's focus first of all on our weather here. We know it's been impacted by climate change. We're bracing for another blast of heat, and that's going to hit our wildfires.
That's right. A lot of climate scientists, I should say, remarking on the weather here in BC this summer season as a microcosm for the changes that we're going to continue to see because of climate change, and weather is how most people experience climate change. So without further ado, another heat wave just around the corner. I do want to start off though with the fire danger rating. It is amazing what a weekend of some rain and cooler temperatures can do. As we've heard, that has lowered the spread of wildfires. So we're still seeing our wildfires of note grow, just not as quickly. And that is because of these cooler temperatures as well. This is sort of where we hit today in the interior, getting close to the 30s. Things are going to start building beginning tomorrow. This is a snapshot of the forecast highs back up to beyond seasonal for Tuesday. It's Wednesday that we're really going to start to get into the dangerous heat for the south coast and the fire-inducing heat for the interior. Look at this heat wave really building in through Friday. I think Friday and Saturday will be the peak for the interior. High 30s for those areas that we're seeing our wildfires of note right now. And Dan, this is going to be a big story for us on the south coast as well. Not quite as hot as our heat dome end of June, but authorities already asking people to start preparing. I'll have more on those numbers and what to expect here on the south coast coming up.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, Joe has a new podcast that takes on the importance of combating climate change. Beaches and Mountains delves deeper into the natural wonders across our province and how people are fighting to preserve them.
And say, like, save the whales, we need to save the whales, when a lot of people have never been to the ocean. A lot of people have no connection to the land that they're on.
If you love exploring the great outdoors, you may have a preference for either beaches or mountains. Luckily for us in BC, we can easily enjoy both, but for how long? That's one question Joe and co-host Rohit Joseph explore as these landscapes face the threat of climate change. Beaches and Mountains features people with deep connections to shorelines and mountaintops across our province. And they talk about why it matters to conserve them. The three-part series is available to stream on the CBC Listen app. Federal politicians came together today to denounce anti-Asian racism and get a glimpse of the future Chinatown Storytelling Center.
And we think that this new storytelling center is going to breathe new life right here into Vancouver's Chinatown and really create a hub for preservation and celebration of the Chinese-Canadian experience.
The kiosks and exhibits all focus on preserving Chinatown's cultural heritage. The minister urges Canadians to fight anti-Asian racism by visiting the center. That's set to open next month. Meng Wanzhou's lead defense lawyer says the judge overseeing her extradition hearing should stay the proceedings. Lawyer Richard Peck today reminded the judge of former U.S. President Donald Trump's role in the case. Trump threatened to sue the Huawei executive as a bargaining chip to get a better deal with trade deal with China shortly after she was arrested in BC more than 2 years ago, something her legal team compares to ransom. Meng is charged with fraud in a case that's related to alleged violations of U.S. sanctions against Iran. The case continues for the next 2 weeks. And a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. That free app is also where you can find other CBC programs. CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. More Canadians are getting tested for COVID-19 and testing positive. What's driving the uptick in cases after this? Thanks for joining us on our commercial-free live stream tonight. Visitors to national park sites on Prince Edward Island have a new way to connect to the land. Parks Canada has collaborated with PEI's Poet Laureate to come up with what's called a park promise. People are being asked to make a commitment to respect natural spaces on that island.
It's time to sing the promise. It isn't very long. The 7 directions we learned today will help to make us strong.
In PEI National Park, we welcome a large number of visitors every year. And the Park Promise is a unique way of engaging those visitors and helping share some of the Indigenous teachings, and also to make them more aware of the impacts of their actions on the environment during their visit to PEI National Park and beyond.
So we were talking about creating something beautiful and long-lasting that would be dedicated to the heart and soul of parks here in PEI. And the first thought was a poem. I promise to the east to love the flora and fauna. I promise to the south to leave the park the way I found it.
And this is where the concept of shared stewardship really comes into play. You know, we love the park, and we know that our visitors love the park as well, and want it to continue and to be here for future generations to enjoy. And so it is with this caring devotion that the Park Promise took root.
My teachings from the directions are love, humility.
And I was embracing my teachings that I grew up with, my 7 sacred teachings and the 7 directions, and how all of those things could be used to create something beautiful to celebrate our parks.
We have a page dedicated to the Park Promise. On that page, we have links to the videos. We also had some content from Julie about the Indigenous teachings and the symbolism.
It goes beyond just Indigenous culture. It goes into being caretakers of the land, making sure that what we enjoy right now is going to be there for future generations.
So it's hoped that really the small steps that you can take through the promise will translate into larger actions taken for a more sustainable future overall.
We'll be back in a few moments with more stories across Canada, around the globe. That includes a possible federal election as well. Later in this program, we're going to have much more on the UN's climate change report today. Drastic action needed, it says. Stay with us. With federal cabinet ministers making announcements and party leaders speaking across this country, you'd be forgiven for thinking we were in an election campaign. We are not, at least officially, but as Travis Danrad shows us, that might be right around the corner.
A new week, potentially the last before the official campaign begins, saw the Liberals out selling their childcare plan, and the opposition leaders were out too.
The focus should be on getting people the help they need.
Speculation is mounting the call could come as early as the end of the week. Right now, the polls give the Liberals the edge.
My model has the Liberals winning just being short of the majority threshold. So maybe 6 weeks of campaignings will change that. But right now, we have to say that the Liberals are in the driver's seat regarding voting intentions.
The opposition argues it's not the right time for an election.
My biggest concern right now is the potential 4th wave of COVID-19. We shouldn't be rushing to an election.
I've said I want to make a decision that's in the best interest of Canadians. And you would think that in a pandemic, that the Liberals would think the same way as well. It doesn't look like that's the case.
Canada's top doctor has said voting can be done safely.
So many of us are now fully vaccinated, which adds even more protection.
But as cases rise, uncertainty remains.
I know the Liberals would like to have an election, now. However, it's unpredictable what it's going to be like in a couple months.
Newfoundland and Labrador's election was upended by a COVID outbreak. The vote went on eventually by mail, but with record low turnout. Still, Elections Canada says it is ready to go. Pandemic voting, including single-use pencils, sanitizer, and social distancing, all part of the plan. 5 provinces and territories have already run elections since the pandemic began. One trend, a steep rise in mail-in ballots, which take longer to count than ballots cast on Election Day. Elections Canada is already warning it could take days to finalize some results. Be prepared to wait, it says, if and when election night happens. Travis Danrad, CBC News, Ottawa.
There is growing alarm about a 4th wave of COVID-19 in Canada as cases start to climb again. That's causing concern around travel inside this country and out. Vicadopia looks into the uptick and what can be done about it.
As COVID-19 cases tick back up, even fully vaccinated people aren't taking any chances. In just a month, the number of people showing up here for tests has quadrupled, and a greater percentage are testing positive, driven by the more transmissible Delta variant. The average daily case count is back up to where it was in June, and the upward trend is happening sooner than it did last year. On average, twice as many people are testing positive than last August, and the trend is being led by BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan.
we know the way this virus behaves. We know that once we start seeing increased cases, that direction of case growth isn't going to change unless we change something.
In Alberta, pediatricians are calling for that change with new public health measures, as cases have gone up since the province opened up.
We've also seen in Louisiana, where pediatric hospitalizations have been rapidly rising, that they've reinstituted indoor mask mandates in the state. And so we need both monitoring measures as well as some mitigation measures.
It's adult Canadians who haven't been vaccinated that make up 90% of new cases. The latest figures show they're also the ones most likely to be hospitalized or die. But there is optimism. History doesn't have to repeat itself this wave.
It's about what can we do fast to increase vaccine uptake, which pretty much is around some type of vaccine mandate or COVID certificate or something along these lines, to quickly move, a relatively large chunk of individuals who are indifferent or hesitant to action.
Action now to prevent worse outcomes later. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
As we mentioned, the Canadian border opened to non-essential travel from fully vaccinated Americans today. Travelers and the businesses that rely on them are celebrating. But as Ellen Morrow shows us, some experts say the timing may not be right.
This is the arrivals area at Pearson International Airport in Toronto, and for the first time in about a year and a half, Americans are arriving here for non-essential travel, and they will not have to quarantine. Now, to do that, they have to be fully vaccinated, and they have to have proof of a negative COVID test taken within 3 days of their arrival here in Canada. For people who've been separated from loved ones and friends for so long, for those businesses that rely on American tourism, today is a great one.
This couple is reuniting in Niagara Falls after 16 long months apart.
It's everything. It's been so long, and it's about time. I know it's only one-sided open right now, but it's better than nothing at this point.
That happiness echoing all along the border, even as travelers at some crossings faced an hours-long wait.
It's great. It's absolutely wonderful. It's our partners here in Canada and the U.S., and we're just so happy to be here.
Absolutely liberated, and I hope soon the U.S. returns the favor to our closest ally. So
a step back to normal, almost a happy day for those people. The border, you'll remember, closed all the way back in March 2020, at the very beginning of the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, Canadians have been able to fly to the United States, but the American land border does remain closed until at least August 21st, with U.S. officials citing concerns over the Delta variant that is fueling a surge in cases across the United States. In Canada, experts also expect that the Delta variant will fuel a fourth wave in this country in the fall. And some experts have expressed concern that perhaps opening the border now, with colder weather looming, with schools back in session not too long from now, might not be the right time.
It's a time when the Delta variant is now surging around the world, and we see this in the US as well, with 100,000 cases a day now. And in many provinces in Canada, we're seeing an uptick in cases. So at a time when cases are increasing, it seems that timing, is really poor.
The federal government insists that fully vaccinated American travelers pose little risk to Canadians. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
Adding to those travel tensions, the U.S. is now averaging more than 100,000 new infections a day. The country hasn't seen this kind of surge since February. As Megan Fitzpatrick reports, a handful of states are driving the rising numbers.
About 20% of the country's new cases and hospitalizations are coming from Florida. Last week, a couple of days in a row, they kept setting and then breaking new records for new daily infections. Louisiana is one of the states with the lowest vaccination rates in the country, and officials trying to push residents there to go get vaccinated. The rate has ticked upwards a bit in the last few days, but there's concern it might not be happening quick enough to catch up with the quickly spreading Delta variant in that state. There's also concern about the rising number of hospitalizations as well. That's going up fairly quickly in the U.S. right now, too. A 30% jump nationwide in just a week span. And again, it's states like Florida and Louisiana that are seeing their hospital beds fill up. We've been hearing stories of some hospitals having to transfer patients out of their cities, canceling surgeries. There's also concern about the number of kids ending up in hospital with COVID-19 in recent days as well. Take a listen to Dr. Anthony Fauci's concerns about that.
All you need to do is do a survey of the pediatric hospitals throughout the country, and you're seeing a considerable number of young people who are not only infected, but who are seriously ill. Again, the numbers compared to the elderly are less, but that's a false comparison. These kids are getting sick. We've really got to make sure we protect them.
Dr. Anthony Fauci also expressing concern about what started in South Dakota this weekend. A massive motorcycle rally held in Sturgis, an annual festival. Last year, hundreds of cases were linked to it, and that was without the more contagious Delta variant circulating. So he and others worried about this potentially being a super spreader event. And of course, this occurring as cases continue to rise in this country. Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC News, Washington.
Climate change has already had devastating impacts on Canada. Coming up, what the federal government says it's doing to mitigate those effects.
British Columbians, eager to beat the expected influx of suds lovers to the border towns this weekend, have already started trekking back and forth across the line with their purchases. All 5 crossings adjacent to the Lower Mainland, Douglas, Aldergrove, Pacific Highway, Huntington, and Boundary Bay, report increased traffic. Canadian Customs, braced for the onslaught, will have additional booths and crews at all points. Each individual is allowed to bring back 2 cases per trip. Customs official Graham Toomey says BC residents trying to exceed the limit will lose their beer.
And if they're declared, they just pay the duty is what it amounts to. If they're not declared, if it's a certain amount, we can seize the beer and we can seize the vehicle. And then there's penalties that could be applied to it.
Are you suggesting to anybody that tries to smuggle something over the legal limit that this situation could happen to them and they could theoretically end up having their car confiscated or that sort of thing?
Well, that could happen. If you smuggle beer or any other goods, your car could be confiscated.
The thrifty market in Blaine will likely be one of the big winners because of the BC dispute. The store normally sells about $20,000 worth of beer a month, but anticipating the Canadian demand, the operators have brought in more than 3 times that much and are still worried about running out. The cost of a 12-pack of American works out to between $8 and $11, including all tax, in U.S. funds. This compares with $5 Canadian for local beer when it's available. The exodus of parched BC residents to the border towns of Washington state to buy beer has barely begun. But if the weather stays warm, and it's supposed to, there could be monumental traffic jams before the weekend is over. Bob Gillingham, CBC News at the Douglas Crossing.
So you're losing your jobs.
This corps of people, many volunteers, helps women who suffer from severe depression after childbirth. And today, they were fired.
It's strange that we're hearing it from you and not from Grace McCarthy first.
In Victoria, the Minister of Human Resources, Grace McCarthy, announced the 599 firings and a reorganization of the ministry.
We always feel very sympathetic, and I have a great empathy for anyone who loses their job, so I frankly do not feel, it's not a happy announcement to make.
But the BC Association of Social Workers does not buy her arguments.
A lot of the work done by family support workers is to keep families together. And that, I believe, will now be lost. Families will now be destroyed.
Meanwhile, on another front, the presidents of the 3 universities in the province expressed alarm at Bill 3. This bill will allow all public employees in the province to be fired without cause, and so university professors will lose their tenure.
We will have difficulty in attracting and retaining the people that we would like to have at our universities.
The professors say that Bill 3 is not restraint. They say it is another attempt by the province to gain more control. Georges Tramel, CBC News, Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight for you on CBC Vancouver News.
I haven't seen my mom in person and my brother and sister-in-law, my niece and nephew, so I'm super excited.
We had no idea we would not be able to get into Canada, when we bought our house.
It's taken more than a year, but fully vaccinated Americans and permanent residents can now enter Canada. Hundreds of people lined up this morning to come into BC. They must have 2 vaccines approved by Health Canada and provide a negative COVID test within 72 hours.
It's really stressful because you just don't know what's going on.
My dog had 14 puppies, so it was a gong show.
Wildfires in the interior have forced thousands of people to flee their homes. Many are now in Vernon, signing up for emergency support, waiting and worrying about their properties. While rain on the weekend helped slow some of the growth on the massive White Rock Lake fire, another heat wave is set to hit the area. Back to tonight's other top story now. A new report from the UN Council on Climate Change, which warns of grave consequences if we do not curb global warming. This is the effects of rising global temperatures become more apparent right here at home. The CBC's Karen Pauls on how Canada is responding.
Extreme weather events have affected millions of Canadians. Firefighters are already preparing for more of this as a result of climate change.
But we're really focusing in on the weather piece and as well as the fuels piece and really trying to understand how that's changing over time.
In June, Lytton, BC recorded the hottest temperature ever in Canada, 49.6 degrees Celsius. The next day, the village burned to the ground.
And we're at the point, the spear point of climate change, but it's coming for everybody.
Almost 600 British Columbians died during June's heat wave, including 91-year-old Annie Brown. Her apartment didn't have air conditioning.
If we had been planned better, I know that she would still be here with us right now.
On the prairies, heat, drought, and grasshoppers have ravaged crops and pastures.
You can't make it rain.
The north warming at more than twice the rate of the rest of the world. Arctic sea ice at its lowest level since 1850. Seawater levels rising. None of this a surprise to Indigenous people who've been sounding the alarm for years.
The Arctic also has great significance to the rest of the world. It is the cooling system for the planet. It is the air conditioner for the planet.
In the Rockies, glaciers are melting faster than ever recorded.
The Athabasca Glacier that many Canadians have visited in Jasper Park was melting 2/3 of a meter per week downwards, and so that's a tremendous loss of ice.
Mountain snow and ice melt caused unprecedented flooding in Whitehorse, something parts of Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic region are also familiar with.
This is not a partisan issue. This is a science issue.
The federal minister is defending the Liberal government's commitments, which include carbon pricing and a pledge to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
Let's figure out, working together between provinces, territories, the federal government, Indigenous leaders, and municipalities, how we can move forward.
Scientists say this crisis has been caused by human action, and it will require bold action to reverse it. In the meantime, no part of this country will be spared. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Vancouver.
Today's climate change report is resonating with many people here in BC, especially in light of this summer's scorching temperatures and the wildfires. For more on the report and its impact, we're joined by Zipporah Berman, Program Director with the environmental organization Stand Earth, and Adjunct Professor at York University. Zipporah, first of all, perhaps this is the most severe warning we've heard from scientists and global leaders so far. What stood out to you most in this report?
Hearing some of the world's leading scientists, the Secretary General of the United Nations, call it a code red for humanity. This is the biggest warning call we've ever heard. The report says very clearly that climate change is happening faster than we thought. It's more serious, quicker, and we're not doing enough. The authors were very clear that we need to stop the expansion of coal, oil, and gas, all fossil fuels now, and transition very quickly to renewable energy and electrification.
Now, as you mentioned, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has referred to this report, speaking of oil and gas, as a death knell for coal and fossil fuels. In this country, Canada is pressing forward with, for example, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, among other projects. Is it realistic to think that Canada will at least phase out fossil fuels? And you mentioned at least very quickly. What's the time frame here, do you think?
Really what this report is showing us and what we're living through in British Columbia right now with the fires and the heat dome, billions of sea life killed, dying off this year, is that the timeline is actually yesterday. And the fact is that we can't afford any more fossil fuel project. That means no Trans Mountain Pipeline. It means no LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink. They have to be stopped. We can't afford to build more fossil fuel infrastructure today because what the scientists have been very clear about today is that every ton of carbon we don't emit right now in our history will save lives. And we're not prepared. They were also very clear that this is not just an ecological disaster. It's not just a human rights tragedy, but it's also an economic and financial disaster if we continue to build more fossil fuels.
So on the other side, it can be hard to remain optimistic when you hear code red for humanity. What can someone who's watching this right now, who may be feeling understandably alarmed or even in fact helpless, try to do to help?
Call your MP, call your MLA. What people need to realize is it's not just our individual actions. More importantly, it's the laws and spending, how much we put towards climate action and preparing, retraining people to work in a newer, cleaner economy, and preparing our communities because climate change is happening now. This report is very clear. It's not about something that's going to happen in the future. It's about something that is happening right now. And we already have so many emissions as a result of primarily oil, gas, and coal that are trapped in our atmosphere, smothering the earth, that we're going to continue to feel the impacts of climate change. And so we need to prepare. And in order to do that, we have to hold our elected officials accountable. They need to act now as though it's an emergency, because it is.
Zipporah Bergman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
At almost 6:41 alive, look at Burrard Inlet. Cloudy and cool day today, but the heat is coming back later this week. How hot will it get? Johanna will have our full provincial forecast after this.
Come on in.
In this salon, there are no men's or women's cuts or pricing. Prices based on length, not gender. And the styling is getting national attention from one of the country's best-known drag queens.
I feel like I'll definitely have a breakdown if I see Brooklyn wearing my wig like on the show.
Thomas Malong and Laura Anderson own Vivid Hair Salon in Antigonish. Last month, they swept 2 of 3 categories in a national competition. They recreated their winning looks on custom wigs for Brooklyn Heights, runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race, and host of Canada's Drag Race.
We've always loved drag culture.
Like, drag queens are like the pioneers of, you know, going against the norm in a way and just being themselves and representing a world that for a long, long time wasn't, you know, okay.
They want their salon to be the most creative, stylish, and welcoming space it can be for everyone. And they love encouraging clients to experiment.
I think people are becoming a lot more free in their looks and finally, you know, realizing that they can express themselves through, you know, fashion, hair, whatever.
Well, good morning. Come on in.
Chris Fraser teaches sociology at St. Francis Xavier University. Today, though, we're meeting alter ego Joni Cash, a non-binary drag queen.
Pretty close to being tuned. You're bound to lose, you fascist bound to lose. When I moved to Antigonish, I knew that it was going to be a difficult place for somebody like me to live, and I'm queer, and I do drag, and I'm out of a closet, and Antigonish was not the most welcoming place. There were at least 2 incidents of gay bashing the year that I started work here in 2004.
But Fraser says the town has come a long way since then. They've been hosting a drag show, Priscilla, Queen of the Highlands, for over a decade.
Yeah, it's a big miracle in the Little Vatican. And I can see people physically just settling into themselves when they walk into that room. So that's the power of that performance space.
Fraser says the town has hit some pretty major milestones since the first drag show. Now you'll see rainbow flags downtown during Pride Month. And Antigonish has its first openly gay town councillor.
Having that show here, I think, has more of an impact than people realize on a small town.
I want Antigonish to just be known for being a place that anybody's welcome and for being a place that you can do what you love in.
All right, take care. See you.
Rose Murphy, CBC News, Antigonish.
She's back. Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the full provincial forecast. Joe, it was brief and we need more of it, but it was nice to have a bit of rain this weekend.
Ooh, did you actually get to step out and feel it? Did you?
I did not. I was inside looking at it. It looked good.
That's okay,
and
too.
then I went to bed. I feel like I did enough.
You know what? You did enough. Yeah, you don't need to experience it in all senses like I did, but...
You're a trooper. That's why we pay you the big bucks.
Exactly. Yeah. However you took in the 22.1 millimeters this Saturday, it was nice. It was really nice. And that ended our dry stretch. Of course, we are first place for longest dry stretch in Vancouver without any precip. We are third place for longest dry stretch without any measurable precipitation. We did see a couple of trace days in there, 52 days. And we are 23 days behind the longest dry stretch of all time. If you want one more stat, here you go. The oldest record to beat is actually from the 1950s. Climate change, obviously a big topic today, even though our longest dry stretch was back in the 50s. The other top 10 driest stretches in the past couple of decades. So we're seeing that marker everywhere. Okay, let me take you to the current temperatures because that's it for the rain as we keep talking about. Our next story is the next heat wave. 21 right now at YVR. Today is the last seasonal day we've got across the South Coast for the foreseeable future. We are climbing after that. We are still seeing some cloud cover across the province. We're actually seeing some late day increasing cloud in through Metro Vancouver, and that's because of what's left of that front tracking over the Rockies, but a little bit of a trailing front right now, bringing some gusty winds to the interior. Prince George looking at 40 plus kilometer per hour gust right now. A little bit concerning for the southern interior tonight, but luckily fuels are a little more less dry than they were last week because of the weekend we've had. But that cloud is going to clear out quickly. And in fact, check out the accumulated rainfall for the next 48 hours, nothing across southern BC. Most of it's headed up towards central and northern BC because we are getting into our heat dome. So just a quick look at those forecast temperatures right through to Wednesday. That's when we'll start to see that heat really build for the southern interior. And we're likely going to be hitting the 40s across parts of, 30s, I should say, sorry, across parts of Metro Vancouver, 40s with the humidex. That's for Metro Vancouver. I imagine we'll be seeing heat warnings probably issued in the next couple of days in advance of this heat wave that'll last Thursday through Saturday. And yes, if it was, unbearably hot in your place last heat dome, start thinking about those plans and checking on your neighbors and community members. We know how deadly a heat wave can be. Even though we're not quite as hot, this is one to watch for. 24 tomorrow, 26 on Wednesday, and then things get really hot. Look at those overnight lows for Thursday and Friday. And Dan, I don't see that next round of rain in the forecast, at least for the next 2 weeks. I'll let you know first sign.
No kidding. Thank you, Joe. And very good advice for checking on those who are more vulnerable than we are. Cheers. While the pandemic nearly canceled the Tokyo Summer Olympics, There are no such talks when it comes to the Winter Olympics in Beijing. China says the Games will go ahead as planned in less than 6 months' time. But as Sarah Levitt explains, global politics and calls for a boycott could complicate them.
Competition may be over in Tokyo, but for alpine skier Eric Reed, it's all about preparing for Beijing.
In the back of your mind, you know the big event of the year is in February.
For the last 2 weeks, though, he loved watching Canadians compete despite COVID-19.
It was still the athletic performances that really shone through.
But there's more than athletics and COVID hanging over the 2022 Beijing Olympics, even if the International Olympic Committee doesn't want to address it.
Are you willing to condemn the internment of Uyghur Muslims in camps in China?
Steve, I think we already answered that question. We're going to come on to that. We'll answer your question.
International human rights groups have been calling on countries to boycott the Games in protest of the Chinese government's forced detention and indoctrination of ethnic minorities, including Uyghurs.
In the opinion of the House,
in February, the House of Commons passed a motion saying the treatment of Uyghurs amounts to genocide. Add to that the unresolved detention of 2 Canadians, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spaver, held since December 2018, just days after Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou was arrested in Vancouver. The Canadian Olympic Committee, though, says boycotts don't work. This expert agrees.
You can take a stand on China, but it seems that outside of the Olympics, nobody really wants to take that stand anyway. So why would you make the Olympics the time when you want to take that stand? And the ones that are going to have to pay the price are the athletes.
For his part, Reed remains focused on the podium.
You don't show up to these events, then you have all these Chinese athletes performing better. So I think the biggest statement you can make is actually going to Beijing and beating their athletes.
With the ongoing pandemic, it's unclear what safety protocols athletes will face come February, or if fans will be in the stands. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
After the break, we'll show you a vegetarian take on a traditional Hawaiian dish that's gaining popularity here in BC. Stick around.
See puffins in New Brunswick, there's only one place you can go. An island off of an island that's claimed by both Canada and the United States. To get there, you need to get on one of the most southern points in the province and get on a boat. Then you need to get on another boat, and that will take you to Machias Seal Island. An island where the few visitors allowed on its shores each year have often been from the U.S. or outside of the province. That was until the pandemic hit. Travel restrictions meant the birders who snatched up the limited amount of tickets weren't able to come. So for 2 seasons now, New Brunswickers have been able to enjoy this world-class seabird sanctuary.
Like the Galapagos of the maritime.
Derlin Ingersoll has been bringing visitors to this isolated island for 27 years now. He says getting to showcase it to the people who live in this province has been special.
There's also not just New Brunswickers, but Grand-Mananners. They are also New Brunswickers, but they don't get the opportunity to see what is in their backyard. The other day we had an opening of 8, and within a matter of minutes it was filled by Grand-Mananners who have never been down there.
I had no idea it was even there. I just saw it online last summer and it was all booked up. So this year we booked it in March and we could only get like Wednesday in the middle of the week. We couldn't even get a weekend. It was so booked. Yeah, it's like a hidden gem kind of in New Brunswick who we got to find out about. Well, there were so many cute little puffins flying around everywhere. There's probably 1,000 of them, I guess. I don't know. And I was so excited. I felt like a little kid at a zoo, but it was a lot better.
We're
worked in Blacks Harbor for a summer as an auxiliary police officer, and I was back in 1978. So I thought I'd never come to Grand Manan after working an entire summer. So I thought on our way to Nova Scotia, we'd stop here, spend some 4 days, and explore the island. I knew there were puffins, and I wanted to see some puffins.
You get to listen to people say, wow, I never knew this was here, or why did I wait so long?
You may have noticed poke bowl restaurants popping up in Metro Vancouver. That traditional Hawaiian dish has become a widespread food trend across the world now. Usually they're prepared using sashimi-grade fish, but spearfisher Andrew Chin has taken a vegetarian take on it using a key ingredient, sea asparagus. They can be foraged on the marshy coastlines of our province. Have a look.
Today, we're going to be making a vegetarian take on poke. Poke is definitely something that's grown in popularity here on the mainland in the recent years. It was my favorite way of preparing any of the fish that I would catch spearfishing in Hawaii. And the star ingredient in our poke today is going to be sea asparagus. It's a wild-growing vegetable that has a really nice salty brininess. I'm Andrew. Growing up as a second-generation Canadian, I didn't always feel proud of my ethnicity or my culture, and I often tried to hide aspects of them to fit in. After spending most of my adult life living in Hawaii, I'm now learning how to express my culture, cuisine, and what I learned in Hawaii through the local ingredients our province has to offer. So we found the sea asparagus right here in this kind of low-lying marshy area by a coastline. And sea asparagus has this really nice brininess. It really just tastes like the ocean. You are just gonna pick the ones that are a little bit smaller and thinner, as those guys are gonna be more tender. And this low-calorie vegetable is also high in vitamins like A, B, and C. So today we're gonna be doing a take on poke using some root vegetables. Not something that's super accessible and really easy for anybody to pick up. And we've also got some sweet onion, some fresh cucumbers, and then the star of the dish right here is some sea asparagus that we found here on the coastline. Now this is gonna add a lot of freshness and crispness to our dish, as well as that ocean flavor. We're gonna be cutting the carrots and the yams both into 1-inch cubes. So we've got our pan here over medium heat. We don't want too high of a heat because we actually don't want to develop any crispness on these vegetables. We do want them to get fork tender, but we don't want anything crispy. So I'm just gonna add about a tablespoon of oil into the pan. I'm gonna mix that around. And then we're gonna go ahead and add in our vegetables. So now that that's going, that's cooking, we're also gonna cut our cucumbers. I'm just gonna cut them lengthwise, cut off the ends, and I'm gonna cut these guys into half moons. And we're also gonna go ahead and cut our sweet onion. So we're just gonna use about 1/4 of that, and we're gonna thinly slice it. All right, and now that we've got all our prep done for our vegetables, we're just gonna make the sauce right now. So super easy. I use the same sauce for fresh fish as well when I make poke. We're just gonna go in with 1/4 cup of soy sauce or shoyu, and then we're gonna go in with about a teaspoon of sugar, and then about another teaspoon of sesame oil. And then we're just gonna give that a really nice whisk to get everything combined and dissolve that sugar. Now that our yams and carrots have cooked nicely, I'm just gonna remove them from the heat and let them cool down over on the side. And I'm gonna put a pot of water on to boil, and we're gonna blanch our sea asparagus next. And we are just gonna cut that into about 1.5 or 2-inch strips. All right, so it's been going for about 30 seconds. So we're just gonna remove that and shock it in some ice water just to stop the cooking process. This is gonna allow us to keep a really nice crisp texture to the sea asparagus. Now that our yams and carrots have cooled down, we're just gonna add them into a mixing bowl. And we're gonna add a couple spoonfuls into the vegetables. And then we're gonna go ahead and mix those up. We're just gonna go ahead and add some of our sweet onion in there. And we're gonna go in with our cucumber. And then we're going to go in with our sea asparagus. Now, like I said, this is going to add a lot of brininess, some freshness, and crunch to the dish as well. And then just a little sprinkle of sesame seeds in there. Okay. You got the softness of the yams and the carrots, the saltiness from the sea asparagus, and that crunch. Really good. That salty brininess of the sea asparagus really completes this vegetarian poke. Enjoy!
I want that right now. You can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here at 11 o'clock after the National, tonight with Isabel Regan. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us.